It is time for deja vu all over again, friends, because it is time for VRRP, the Virtual Router Redundancy Protocol. It's defined in RFC 2338, and it's the open standard equivalent of the Cisco proprietary HSRP that we've been studying to this point. VRRP works so much like HSRP that when you were learning how to use HSRP, you were pretty much learning VRRP. There are a couple of very important differences we're going to see in action. We're going to be running just about the same labs that we did in HSRP with VRRP, so you can see those differences. And here are a couple for you right now. The terminology for our routers is a little bit different. VRRP's equivalent to the HSRP active router is the master router, and VRRP's equivalent to HSRP's standby router is the backup router. Preemption is enabled by default in VRRP, he said in italics. VRRP's advertisements are multicast to 224.0.0.18, and HSRP ads, by the way, are multicast to 224.0.0.2. The MAC address of VRRP routers, the virtual router that is 000005E0001XX, and yes, the XX is the VRRP group number in hex. Now we're going to see this particular protocol in action in just a moment, and here's what we're going to configure. We're going to have a master router that's going to be MLS2, and MLS1 is going to be our backup router. The virtual router we're going to create with the same IP address that we had in the HSRP section, that being 172.16.23.12. Let's go ahead and bring the live equipment up. By the way, if you want to get in on the pool about how many times I'll type show standby instead of show VRRP, because I'm doing these right after the HSRP videos, it's really tough to switch gears. So let's go ahead. Let's make sure, first of all, over on 2, that our VLAN 100 is up. There it is, 172.16.23.2. VRRP. There's your group number. Here are your choices, which are going to look really familiar. And we're going to use IP because we want to enable it. And our address for the virtual router is 172.16.23.12. We have the secondary option as we had with VRRP, but we're not going to use it. And that's it. That's all we're going to do. As a matter of fact, and you could see the state changes even before we went over here to 1, that we were going from init to backup immediately. So we will wait and see how that works out. Let's make sure. Interface 100 is up. VLAN 100, 172.16.23.1. And it's VRRP. The group number comes right after that. Then we want IP again, and then 172.16.23.12. And that one goes init to backup, and let's do a show standby. Almost had me. Didn't finish it, so it doesn't count. Show VRRP. And we go from top to bottom here. VLAN 100 group 1 state is backup because we do have that priority comparison, but they both have the default priority right now. So the highest IP address is going to win it, and that being over on VLAN 100 on switch 2. So right now the state is backup. That's what we expect to see. Virtual IP listed right there. Virtual MAC, we know what that's going to be, and the last 2 digits there are the group number in hex since we used group 1. It's 01. Advertisements every second. It seems like a lot of advertisements, but that is correct. Advertisement interval is 1 second. Preemption enabled, he said again in italics with emphasis. The default priority is 100. It tells you what the master router IP address is. Master router sounds so much like a Marvel Comics villain from 1968, like somebody Nick Fury would have fought before Jim Steranko came along. Just a reference for me, nobody else. Back to work. The master advertisement interval is 1 second. That's because if you're changing that interval, you do need to change it on the master router itself. And that's it. You know, we've got our down interval, but as long as we're getting those little ads every second, we're perfectly fine. So let's go over to switch 2 and compare it. And state is master, but just about everything else is the same. It tells you master router is 172.16.23.2 local. Priority is 100. So if preemption's enabled, all I really should have to do is raise the priority on switch 1 to make it the master router, right? Right. So let's see if that theory holds up. Interface VLAN 100, VRRP. VRRP just doesn't come out of your fingers real well, I will admit that. And we're going to set the priority. It's 1 through 254 here, 1 through 255 for HSRP. We're going to go with 150. And there's our config message. And there's our state change, just 2 seconds behind that. VLAN group 1 state back up to master. And there we go. There's the first one, show standby. Show VRRP is our VRRP command, and that's got now state as master for this switch, which we'd expect. And everything else, except of course the priority, has stayed the same, and now the master router is listed as local. So that's really it for getting a VRRP deployment started. You just need that one command. The big difference, as you know, beyond the terminology, is that preemption is enabled by default. What we're going to do, we're going to just keep cooking right here, and let's go over back to switch 2, and we're going to go ahead and make this the master switch again. Let's see, what do we set it to? We'll just go ahead and set that to 200. And priority is 200, state is backup, but there's the change right there we were waiting for. And we'll just verify it one more time, and the state is master with a priority now of 200. VRRP offers interface tracking as well as just like HSRP did. It's configured a little bit differently though, and I want you to see this concept because this concept kind of goes with other protocols as well that you'll bump into in your studies. This is the exact same setup we had in the HSRP lab. We know that right now, switch 2 is the master router. It's going to handle all the data that's heading to this server that's found on Fast Ethernet 0/3 on both switches. So what we want to do is track this particular interface and say, okay, if the interface goes down, we want this switch's priority to go down by so much. So first off, what are we going to do before we do anything else with interface tracking? Make sure the interface is up and running. That we're going to track. And that's it. Fast Interface 03 is up. Line Protocol is up. That's all that a network admin could ask for. Now, what we've got to do is track this as an object before we actually configure interface tracking. The way I've always remembered it is to track and then VRRP track. I know it's not that intuitive, but it's better than nothing. And it will stick with you after a while. We have to use the track command first to set this as an object. You'll see what I'm talking about. It sounds complicated, but it's really not. And what we're doing is creating a tracked object. And when you put it that way, it's like, oh, you know, tracked object, it sounds complicated. It's not. We're going to give it the number 1. And we're going to select interface here. And then, of course, when we hit help for that, we're shown all kinds. And we are going to track Fast Ethernet 0/3. Now with this, you can set some different parameters. We're not going to get into those in IP routing, but that is something in your future studies you may well hit. What we're going to stick with is the line protocol option. And that's it. That's really all we have to put. We're not putting any other configuration on the tracked object itself. Now the number that we assign this tracked object is beyond important because it has to be mentioned in the tracking command in VRRP. And you'll see exactly what I'm talking about right here. And VRRP 1 track is what we're doing now, event tracking. And then it's going to ask you for the number of your tracked object, and that's 1. And we have the choice to set the decrement or to accept the default. Now, if everything else has been so similar between these two, are you willing to bet cash money that the default decrement is 10? I am too, but let's go ahead and we'll see what happens. So really, that's all the command is. And you've got to remember to create that tracked object because it's really easy in VRRP just to go and say, oh, okay, you know, VLAN 100, VRRP 1 track, and then you don't see anywhere to put an interface. You see, you know, 1 through 1000 tracked object. You're like, okay, what the heck is that? So you just create the tracked object first with the track command and then go into VRRP and set up tracking. Now, after all that, let's go ahead and shut that interface down. Actually, before we do that, let's do a quick show VRRP, and you can see now that tracking is set up. and it's even saying track object 1 state up decrement 10. And so that tells us that our default is indeed 10. So let's go ahead with shutting that interface down. And we see immediately a tracking state change message, 1, which refers to the one interface. Fast Ethernet 03, object 1, I should say, interface fast 03, line protocol up to down. Then we see the usual suspects, interface change state to administratively down. We know where that came from. The line protocol is down, but we don't see anything about this router not being the master router any longer. What do you think happened there? I bet you know. I'm insulting you by even asking you. You know that we changed the priority a couple of times earlier in the video, and by that point the priority of switch 2 was 200, and the priority of switch 1 I believe is 150 right now. So the tracking is working beautifully. The object was tracked and the decrement has been decremented, so to speak, but it's only 10, so it's not enough to bring that priority below 150. So we have to do the same thing we did with HSRP. I wanted to show you this again because it's a great reminder. When preemption is enabled, you tend to take it easy on the decrement. You don't really think about it with VRRP, but it's the same thing. If you're decrementing and you want the other router or switch to take over, it's got to be enough of a decrement to let that switch take over. So what we'll do is repeat that command, but this time we're going to put our own decrement in there, and this time we're going to set that to 51. And there it goes. Took place in just a few seconds. VRRP state change, VLAN 100, group 1 state went from master to backup. And we do a show VRRP. And you can see right in the middle, priority is 149, configured at 200. Track object 1, state is down, decrement is 51, and that's why the other switch is now the master. The master router. Got me. Thought I was going to get by with once. Show VRRP. See, priority is 150. Nothing really here to tell you that it's the master because of tracking. But what we'll do now is go over to switch 2. Thank you. Someone redid my line here. There we go. And will it take back over when that interface comes back up just as it did in HSRP? And of course you know it's going to, because preemption is enabled by default. So there you go. Interface 03 change state to up, line protocol change state to up, and then right after that, before that actually, we got the tracking state message, and then finally the VRRP state change message that we have gone from backup to master, and show VRRP will prove that. We're going to talk about VRRP load balancing for just a few minutes on the next video. We're hitting 13 minutes here, so I want to stop this one. And then we will move on to a protocol that's just a little more intuitive when it comes to load balancing. So I'll see you for that on the next 2 videos.